That didn't get answered, usually within 48 hours. Midland is that exceptional and that generous. So we create our calendar, and then in January we celebrate the work we did, and we get excited about the work that's to come. So, and then we roll forward, and then we just do it. We enact everything that we put on that calendar to the best of our abilities. Sometimes it doesn't look like what was originally put there. It may come, morph into something different, but it always has the intent around gifting the community with opportunities to become action-oriented around diversity. And in that structure, it also opens opportunities for much collaboration. One of my favorite projects is a great example of how the structure allows for collaboration is ARM. So if you're not familiar with Anti-Racist Midland, they are the youth of Midland who want to make Midland better. And the beauty of their contribution is that they don't have to. These are probably our most high-performing students that have come through our school systems. Most of them are Ivy League graduates who are working around the world in high-level spaces, and they come back to consult and to engage in making Midland a more inclusive and anti-racist community. So they brought to us a very small seed of an idea that they wanted to capture and amplify the history of Black voices in Midland. They felt that it was a narrative that needed to be told and that wasn't archived anywhere. And we have a pretty robust historical society. Tawny has done some of that work and was sponsored by, and I forget her last name, but she did a presentation around some of the first Black families in Midland. But they wanted to do a more contemporary archiving of it. And so they brought it to us, just like that. This is what we're thinking we need. And thankfully, I made the call and said, does anybody have any energy talents, that they can lend, expertise? And Dr. Jen Vanette said, I do. And if you know Jen Vanette, she certainly does. And that has become just an enormous project, a worthwhile project that is now being sponsored by the Community Foundation and will live in perpetuity because of the structure of the coalition and the network that exists within the coalition. The other one that demonstrates that really well is the Visibility Project podcast. So if you haven't listened to the podcast, you should. It stems from a group of like-minded, like-hearted citizens that believes that stories, hearing each other's stories, hearing stories of different experiences, can change how we neighbor, how we encounter each other, how we view each other. So they had hosted a human library pre-pandemic. It was very successful. It's where humans become books, and their narratives are stories, and you go and you read a book, right, throughout this event. You've been there. And they were heartbroken when the pandemic came because they had big plans to do these on a quarterly basis because it was so well received. And it met its intent. And so we went to the drawing board and we said, well, let's just do a podcast where monthly we, amplify a voice that's maybe muted or maybe unheard, right? Maybe not centered, maybe not a normative story, right? Not the mirror, right? That becomes the window to some new experience outside of ourselves. And we did it, we scraped, we learned about podcasting. And that one too is now being financially, it's now a subcommittee, because it didn't start as a subcommittee of the coalition. We've now brought it in as a subcommittee of the coalition. It's organized, it's connected. They have a very broad reach of stories to tell. And it's now being supported by the Midland Area Community Foundation. So on a monthly basis, we gift these stories and narratives to the community. Phase 2 of that is then creating some educational supplemental materials for then the community to access, right? You hear the story and then let's talk about it, kind of like a book club, right? What did it make you feel? You know, what did it disturb? Did it create discomfort in you? Did it have you reconciling something that you believed, you know, your whole life? So that's phase 2 that's coming. So those are just examples about how the coalition is now functioning as still a programming entity. We still do our Solid 4, our Foundational 4 programs, they still exist, but it's much more robust and networked out to the community as conveners, as partners, but always with the intent and with the high banner raised that, you know, when we say all, we mean all, like all experiences are valuable. And that's where we seek for Midland to be an inclusive community. So.
Thank you, Tina. Our last speaker of the evening is Sharon Mortensen, who serves as President and CEO of Midland Area Community Foundation, a position she has held since June of 2012. The Community Foundation works to address Midland's vision of together, forward, bold, an exceptional place where everyone thrives. Sharon is part of the We Hear You Coalition, a group that was formed by the Midland City Council member Diane Walhelm, and shortly after the murder of George Floyd. The group has conducted a DEI assessment to best understand the gaps that need to be addressed in our community. So I'd like you to welcome Sharon.
What a wonderful thing that you're doing tonight and celebrating this International Day of Peace and coming together and spending your time to have these important conversations. And when I think about what it takes to be a city of peace, it takes being a place where people feel accepted, included, and experience a sense of belonging. And that's really what we're talking about here tonight, is how to achieve that and all the great efforts that are underway in our community as part of that. So the final one I'm going to talk to you about, as Judy mentioned, is the We Hear You Coalition. So Diane Walhelm is the person who really should be here. She's with her father out of state right now, but should be here speaking to you because she is the one that started it. Something important for you to know, if you don't know Diane, is she is the first African American to serve on Midland City Council. So she's absolutely. She's a pioneer. And when the murder of George Floyd happened in May of 2020, as we know, it really brought to the forefront things that had been going on, honestly, for decades and centuries. And it brought it to the forefront for us to really look at and consider this. And following in the heels of that, on June 7th, there was a rally for racial justice that took place in the Center City area, which it was amazing to see the people that came together, the number of people that came out for that. But after the murder of George Floyd, Diane said we need to speak up, and she was thinking about this from the city's perspective. So she, Maureen Dunker, our mayor, and Nicole Ford, who is the Midland City Police Chief, wrote a letter. And the letter really was around, we hear you. We hear your concerns, we hear what's going on, and we want to work to address this as a community. So Diane brought together a group, the We Hear You Coalition. She invited people. I know Gina's a part of that group. I'm a part of that. She invited individuals that she knew from the community that were from diverse backgrounds to be a part of that, to say, what should we do? And what should be the responsibility? And initially it started with the city, and it expanded to include the county. One of our county commissioners also is a part of that. The city and then the county both issued proclamations, or resolutions, I guess it would be the correct term, supporting the work that was underway through this We Hear You Coalition. So when you bring a group together, first you have conversation, you talk about what to do, and then you go, well, really, what should we do next? Because we all have our individual perceptions and what we've seen, but how do we know? And I think DeAndre spoke to what Midland Public Schools is doing. So we said, we need some way to look at where are the gaps and where should we focus our efforts and where should we start. I should read to you too. I wanted to read to you just the We Hear You initiative, and this is from Diane's words here. And then I'll talk to you about what we're doing here. The We Hear You initiative aims to intentionally identify and focus attention on disparities, inequity, and bias to inform and direct sustained, ongoing, assessed, and accountable actions for greater inclusion, justice, and equity to reach our community's vision of together, forward, bold, and exceptional place where everyone thrives. So I just wanted to read those words to you. So because I think that captures the heart of what this group is intending to do. But again, where do we start? There's so much. And so the group said we really need to do a diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment of our community to understand what the greatest needs are and where we should focus our energies. And so much is what Midland Public is endeavoring to do. So the group is working with Saginaw Valley State University, and they have 2 researchers that are working on this. The chief one is Dr. Ken Jolly. Who's also part of Cultural Awareness Coalition too. So he has a great understanding and background in this. So the first we looked at just the quantitative data that's already out there. So a lot of census information and other information that was collected looking at 6 areas. One was demographic. So what do we know about our community? One was housing. So what do we understand about housing, and are there differences in housing for those that are our marginalized communities? Socioeconomics, looking at that, healthcare and well-being, police and criminal justice system, and local government representation. So those are the areas that they went into, but to really fill in additional information, we needed to hear from people in our community and to do a survey. So we had the survey that took place, and the survey was available online February of this year through March of this year. 2,182 people responded to the survey, which in the face of a pandemic and trying to get people to respond, we were pretty pleased. We had 89 questions. So how many of you completed the survey? Okay, I figured this would be a group that we'd have a lot of completers of the survey. Thank you very much for taking your time, because 89 questions is a lot of questions to ask on a survey. But we had a completion rate of 61%, so some people did part, but not all of it. And one thing that we were very pleased with when it came to the survey, now this is not a representative sample of our community. This was whoever completed. But what we found is that individuals from diverse backgrounds were overrepresented in the survey, which is great, because we want to hear from, we were very, very pleased, because we want to hear from individuals that are, don't just hold up the mirror, like for me, but let's look at diverse voices in our community and see what they have to say. Now, we're going to be rolling out the information very soon, but I wanted to share with you a couple, as we've sliced and diced the information, a couple of the questions, and just to share with you, and this is to make the point that there was great difference in how people perceived it depending on your racial, ethnic background. It's not surprising, but one of the questions was you would strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, or strongly disagree with this statement. I believe Midland is a welcoming and inclusive community where I am respected, supported, valued, and can enjoy my fullest life without barriers. Well, our non-Hispanic whites, for the most part, agreed or strongly agreed with that. However, when we got into African Americans, Native Americans, multiple race, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, or North African, other races, we had more that strongly disagreed or disagreed with that. So it pointed out some of the things that we needed to hear these voices, right? To hear. Another one it's similar question, but I believe Midland is a welcoming and inclusive community where everyone is respected, supported, valued. And so just a slightly different take on this. Again, we saw the same kind of differences depending on your background. So what that tells us is, and again, I guess to put it simply, that there are very different experiences and perceptions of race and ethnic relations in our community, depending on what background you come from and what your experiences have been. And there's also very different experiences and perceptions when it comes to belonging and inclusion in our community. So back to, we want to be a place, to be a city of peace, we need to be a place where people feel accepted, included, and experience a sense of belonging. And we want it to be, as we heard our community's vision statement, an exceptional place where everyone thrives. Not everyone is thriving. We have work to do. So just to tell you a little bit of what's next in our work. So coming up on October the 1st, there's going to be a small group coming together to view really the initial results of this survey. It will be the We Hear You Coalition. We've also asked people from those 6 areas that I referenced, housing, socioeconomics, etc., that are leaders in that space to come and to hear these results as well. Ultimately, we know that, for example, let's just take housing. To work on that, certainly we can bring those that lead in that space, but they're going to need to bring others together, including diverse voices and traditionally marginalized communities, to be a part of the conversation as we start to work on what are truly the solutions. So some of our next steps are to release the results, bring a group, begin to mobilize, and then we need to release the results to the community as a whole. And again, I appreciate what, like DeAndre mentioned, Midland Public is doing. We want to be very transparent with this. Here it is. And here it is, kind of unfiltered. Here's what we learned. And okay, let's get to work now in an organized and systematic way. And we know we have great efforts underway, as you heard about, some of the great work of like the Interfaith Council and the Cultural Awareness Coalition, the work that Midland Public Schools is doing in this space. But there's more. We need to amplify their work and the things that they're doing underway, and we need to probably amplify more. One thing I should mention about both our assessment and our survey is we did not touch the education space, and in part because we knew Midland Public was doing work, so we did not want to duplicate. There are a lot of comments that we did get in more of the open questions section of the survey that talked about some of their experiences, and so certainly all of that, and you're going to be there too, I think, October 1st, right? I think Diane was the one that was extending the invite there, because we do want all those comments to be passed on so they can be shared as well as a part of this. So those are our next steps, and really the other piece, so really the 3 components of what We Hear You has done is to analyze the census data and do the survey. We want to make sure that we then release these results and that we engage people in each of those areas that can begin to assist, or again, if there are others working in this already doing it, that we can join and amplify their work. And then ultimately, we plan to have community dashboards that will be published online that will show you where are we now, and then as we move along, where are we in the future, because ultimately, we can have perceptions of what we're doing, but unless we see different outcomes, how do we know that we really are hitting the mark and progressing where we want to go? So those are our next steps. Now, will the We Hear You group be a forever group? I'm not so sure. I mean, I think it was formed for this time. I do think maybe it's a group that will keep an eye on things when it's time to do another assessment, when it's time to hear about the work. But really, the group came together out of what happened in May of 2020, saying we need to do something. And again, I need to commend Diane Brown Walhelm for her leadership in saying we've got to do something, we've got to speak up, we need to figure out where our part is in all of this. So that's a bit about the We Hear You Coalition and the work underway there. And again, stay tuned because these results will be coming very soon for all of you to hear and to be able to understand and respond to as well.
What a bunch of wonderful speakers. Again, I would like to thank them for coming and sharing with us tonight. We'd like to open it up to now just an informal discussion. So we have our wonderful speakers out here, and Maureen, I believe, is going to come up and maybe join them. Possibly. What we'll do is we'll just pass, we've got a mic. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and ask away.
First of all, those were such amazing presentations, everyone. So I guess one question that I had is, listening to each of you, how do you think the synergy between each of you, you're here tonight, but how do you work as a team, or if you can, in the city? How does it overlap, if anybody feels they could discuss that?
I'll speak to that. We all see each other quite a bit. I don't know if that explains it all. We all sit on each other's committees where there's extra support. We know we lean into each other's work. We mobilize each other's networks around initiatives for one another. But it's all informal and collaborative and just kind of collegial almost, that we understand that we are like-hearted, like-minded individuals with the same end goal in mind. So lots of informal support of networks and of each other, I would say, but not necessarily a formalized collaboration.
I'll share a bit as well. And I know I mentioned in my presentation, kind of identifying the champions of DEI work. That's really, for me, has been a learning curve, finding out, learning more about the CAC, working with Unbring, and learning about the interfaith community. And really, a lot of this work does overlap. And so, for myself, on behalf of the district, is try to learn what's going on and learn where we can kind of plug those types of resources in for the school district to benefit from. And from simple things, I know we work with the CAC and Midland County Inclusion Alliance to promote some of their initiatives and programs they have going on. Unbring, what I really love about groups and like individuals is that they can share their perspectives with us. They kind of can catch things that maybe not be at the forefront and make sure they bring into light. Examples, Unbring in our textbook work. There's a textbook with some disheartening disinformation that caused harm to our group of students, and Unbring right away felt that courage and confidence to approach us with it, and they stayed on top of us to make sure that we were doing something about it. And so that type of informal, more formal, when promoting each other's events and initiatives is, and just finding room for each other within our networks. It's kind of how I see us working together.
I wanted to give one more example. Last school year, the Islamic Center raised money for multicultural crayons. It's a small pack of 8 crayons. And then we paired a book with it that we actually worked with the NPS curriculum specialist. She helped us find a good book, get a lesson plan together. And then this school year, NPS is incorporating that crayon distribution as part of an NPS project. So it's heartening, and Haley works with me in everything, but it's heartening for Haley and I to see that little things that we're doing, and when we go talk to the right people, it's going forward. And that's what you gotta focus on, the little victories.
And I'd say one thing to keep in mind is, you know, that this work doesn't belong to any one organization. It belongs to all of us and all of our work. And I think sometimes it can be easy for a community to say, oh, that's the group that does it. Or even like, sometimes I felt like DeAndre, like everybody's like, well, DeAndre's taking care of it. And I'm like, no, DeAndre might be helping to coordinate some efforts, but this work belongs to all of us. And I think we need to really keep that in mind, that each of us in our spheres of work and socializing and, you know, whatever you're involved in, this is a part of all of our work. So I think it's easy to kind of ascribe it to the experts, but it's all of our work. So I just think that's important to keep in mind with this.
You know, I think that this is a wonderful example of our community and our community's culture. And when I got into government, I started paying a little bit more attention to our history and tried to go out and learn some stuff about it. But one of the things, and maybe this is my own belief, but you know, when Mr. Dow came here, he came here and, you know, at a time when, you know, there was really nothing going on, and it was like, what is this place going to be? And, you know, because they had cut down all the trees, you know, this concept of sustainability was gone. I don't think the word was even there at that time. And so what could this community be? And so he came here, but he was not only just building a company. The people that were here were building the kind of place that they wanted to live. And I think that that is something unique to Midland. You know, you don't necessarily see that in some of our surrounding communities because they may have been, you know, automotive towns where people, or a logging town where people came and then they left, or you know, the company came in and then they left. But people here come and want to create the kind of place that they want to live. And I think that this work is a wonderful example of that. This is the kind of place that we, you know, want to live in. And I think, you know, just listening to the speakers, I took some notes on what really touched me when they were talking. And, you know, certainly Gail started out, this is a work in progress. Definitely a work in progress. And then Breen said, you know, we started this Midland Interfaith group of friends, we got together, but it's become so much more. And I think already we see that this has become so much more. And then DeAndre is saying, hey, this is not a fad. This is not a plaque on the wall that we're going to put up and it's going to go away. It's going to be something that we are here working together on for a long time. And when I just look out in the audience, I see Marge Darker. And, you know, I've known Marge since I was a little girl. And she's been working on this for a long time. And it takes all of us to make this happen, and we all have a role in this. And so when this proclamation came in front of council, it was really nice to see that after we voted on it, you know, someone said, this is really good stuff. And that's the role that government can play in this, because government cannot, as a council, we can't do everything. It is, you know, government is the people, and this is us, again, creating the kind of place that we want to live in. And so it is all about being curious and, you know, looking at how do we value this and how important this is to us, and really working on being accepted and including in that incredible sense of belonging. So just in the conversation, as I was listening to these folks speak, it is so much really about what we want to be and how we're already working together, and we each have a role to play. And the thing is about not duplicating, but coming together and creating something, you know, that is a place for us now and well into our future.
I was glad to hear you talk about the ARM students and who have been in school and come back. What else do you know about what's going on now with young students who are still here? What are they learning? What are they determined to do? What have they started doing that you know is making a difference?
Thanks for that question, Jean. I can touch on a little bit about what I'm aware of. So I was fortunate enough to be a part of the Inclusivity Council through the Community Foundation. Is a group derived from there. And they have started a grant process to where they are working to fund inclusion efforts throughout the city. Another one that the Midland County Youth Leadership, I was a part of a training, I think a year or two prior. They just began adding a DEI portion to their training. So we have sophomores, juniors, and seniors, high schoolers across the county collaborate and create, develop leaders from our freshmen that come into our schools, and they are now getting this DEI emphasis as well. And like ARM, the students that are coming back to engage with the community find avenues to bring historically marginalized voices to the forefront. And one of the first things I noticed in my interactions with folks is how rich the Black community here is in Midland, and how we need to hear those voices, get that understanding, and we can thank ARM for their part in doing that. And I know Human Library was touched on. We are currently working, so Gina and Umbreen sit on our DEI advisory team for the Midland Public Schools. We have a subcommittee of other folks, parents, folks in the community that work together to create a plan, fill out an application to get the Human Library experience, to bring that to Midland. So in the spring, or early spring, is where we will be introducing that experience to our high school seniors at the high school. So to get that, learn those perspectives, and just give them time to reflect, and also contribute to what they want the city to be in the world that we live in. So those are just a few things that come to mind for that.
I am blown away. This is so exciting and really moving that all of you, plus the people you work with, are working so hard to make this community a place where everyone belongs. And then I think about how it doesn't end here. The ripples will go out and go out and go out. I don't know how to express my gratitude and admiration. It was exciting to learn. The next thing is, how do we get to, or how can we listen to those podcasts?
You want to get the podcast, they're very good. So I'm not quite sure what your communication streams are for your organization, but maybe Jean, I can send out the link to that, and then you can forward it out. They're dropped on a monthly basis. That's lingo, that's podcast lingo. They're dropped on a monthly basis.
Right.
And if you have any ideas for voices that we need to hear, right, to interrupt what we believe to be true, right? Because that's what really this is about. Or if you want to tell your story, those are the opportunities. I will warn you, we started as a Midland initiative, but we have listeners all around the world. We track clicks, and so it's really interesting to see where our consistent listeners are coming from. But one of the things I wanted to say is that, and the mayor is going to be mad when I say this, all the data that we're going to see coming out, unfortunately, shows us to have typical results of a white dominant, affluent community, right? The way the minoritized populations, the marginalized populations, the vulnerabilized populations are experiencing Midland in this moment. It's pretty typical. So then I always keep thinking, but where we can be our exceptional selves is in our response now. That's how we realize that exceptional ideal. Is how we attend to the data, how we attend to the truth. So,
Thank you. Sharon, excuse me.
was just going to say one other thing. Really the way that we approach this work, and this is terminology you might hear, is the me, we, and us. So it has to start with me, which is where the podcasts are really a beautiful way to start with me, right? To listen to voices that might not be voices you're familiar with. And also, if you just Google Visibility Podcast Midland, it'll pop up too on your, because sometimes when I try to get it to somebody, I'm like, where is that? I'll just Google that. But I think to remember it's me, we, and us. And that is such a great way to approach our work and to keep that in mind. So it starts with the me, and then the we, and then the us. And I believe that's how a lot of us are approaching this work is to do it in that way. So you're definitely on the me journey right now with what you're doing, being here, being part of this International Day of Peace, the work that you're doing. But it's so important, because, and especially for those of us that sit from privilege. If we sit in a privileged background, we need to face our privilege and look at the me part, because you can think, oh, I'm doing, but unless you've done the me work, you have to face your privilege and acknowledge that to do the work.
And then the last thing, it's
Yes.
not a criticism per se, but when you were talking about ARM, you talked about Ivy League schools, and yet DeAndre talked about listening to marginalized voices. So I'm wondering when or how those two worlds could collaborate.
Well, and that's and that's where I think and if you're not familiar with the brave Jonathan Haynes, who is an Ivy League graduate, resident of Midland, and had some horrific treatment in the public school system and in the community. In spite of being such a successfully thriving human. So to me, we have to start understanding the intersection of success and being a minoritized in a population, So, they're not two separate groups. He is of both in a very firm way, so there isn't an intersection. So when I was at Windover, and when I tell the stats of Windover, when I was there, that 30% identifies for special ed, 40% homeless, 90% traumatized, 95% free and reduced lunch, and then I say, and 100% white in Midland. Again, marginalization isn't exclusive to race. And so we need to start, that's some of the perceptions we need to dispel, is that it can be experienced in a multiple ways of being intersected. So, and that's the hard job of DeAndre, because it isn't siloed work, because we're dealing with humans who are very complex and who have varying experiences, and sometimes they're situational, but sometimes they're generational. And so how do you tend to those with one solution, right? So that's the complexity of this work, right? Trying to honor each of those experiences and attend to what the barriers the systems may have put up for the various identities that each of us hold. So I hope that explains why. That's a difficult answer to give. I'm sure you have more.
I was going to say, no, that was good.
I'm done.
But thanks, Gina. Very good answer, very complex answer, and it just speaks to the work that's in front of us as a school district, as a community. Example, I think of a few other members of ARM who, brother and sister, went on to Ivy League educations, doing great work, throughout the world. they came back and expressed to a principal. They regularly engage with principals, that they consult with them, share their experiences, and do some deep dives with them, and that perception of that perceived success, all A's, all A's, down the line, involved in extracurricular activities. Just looking at that success, I think these principals, naively assume that because they're seeing the success, that excludes them from the marginalized treatment, when it doesn't. So when these previous students expressed to them, I did feel like I had a safe space to express myself or share my experiences with you. Unfortunately, they internalized it and just kept it, moving, kept their head down. It's just the way it is, to where now we're saying no. But the response from that principal initially was, "What do you mean? You could have ran this whole school. You could have came in and talked to me about any of those things." They're thinking that, and so I push back and say, "Well, did you act on that? How did you actively make sure you're creating a safe space for them to come?" They obviously didn't feel it because they didn't come to you in those moments. So you got to kind of shift your thinking a little bit. That's kind of what I would add to that.
So one of the thoughts I've had in your comments about talking about students is Midland's emphasis on college, and trade people need to be valued as well. And I think that's an area that perhaps we could do better at. So if anybody has a comment about that, how to do that, or if you agree or disagree.
I'll comment. I'm not sure I know how just yet, but I think it's just our heavy reliance on the traditional route to what we perceive to be success. It was, I heard it growing up. It was education, get a college degree, get a good job, and from where I'm from, that was hammered into our heads, but not necessarily. We weren't really given the tools to go out and actually do that in some instances. And I think this is the sociology minor speaking right now, but I think a wider society, we rely too heavily on those traditional forms of, like I said, perceived success. And yes, we do need to promote value in the trade skills, our infrastructure. That's important. That's what runs the country, making sure our roads are together, safe buildings and things like that. And I think just continue to promote that. We have programs here and there, but it's still kind of stigmatized in the way that that's not the route, or that you need a college education to be successful around here. And I think that's just society nationwide. And I think what adds to that stigma is our emphasis on academic excellence. We see on our school boards that we're top 7, top 15 in the nation, which, like I said, I think it just adds to the stigma and the pressure our students are under.
Can I just make a comment as a former community college president working with trade students? Academic excellence is important for all students, and whether you're going to be a plumber or a doctor, right? I think the most important thing a community can do if they would like to see a stronger emphasis on those trade skills is to value it within the community. Students need to see that the electrician and the plumber and the carpenter and the nurse and the health caregiver, right, and the CNA are as valuable to the community as the person with a 4-year degree. So I do think it starts with us and the way we value the people around us who do that work and how we talk about them, and students see that. So, and I'd be glad to help with that.
Well, And I was going to point out what you've demonstrated is actually the same work around, like, the individual me work. Like, what do I find valuable is usually what I've experienced and what has been shown to me, defined to me, affirmed to me as valuable. And sometimes it's around a profession, other times it's around a race, other times it's around a socioeconomic status, other times it's around a language. And so that same habit of valuing all, right? Or what do we value? What's the common value? Effort, kindness. So when we begin to unpack our individual and what we value and redefine it, or I always say neutralize it, but that kind of reminds me of like superhero pop. Neutralizing my values. You know, I'm bringing them to be in a more non-judgmental way, and to notice people's differences without applying my values to them. And that is exactly what you're speaking about. Because if we value the plumber and the garbage man and the CNA in the same way we value, you know, the architect, right? The engineer and the doctor, then the kids wouldn't have to make a choice based on societal pressure. They would make a choice based on their strength and their heart's desire, which many of them don't right now. So, but it's all the same exercise about neutralizing and understanding what you value and where that came from, and whether or not it is still working for you, or whether or not that's where your work resides.
And one thing, just an informational piece I wanted to mention is the Midland County Career and College Access Network is designed to help all students, especially first-generation economically disadvantaged, get to and through post-secondary education of all kinds. So there is a group actively working on that, and actively working also to promote any sort of post-secondary education, because the skilled trades all require something as a post-secondary education, right? So there is a group working on that, but you are totally correct that, and I think to Gina's point, that we need to make sure that we value all
Peace, 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 peace. People, we were made for peace. Love each other as yourself, for we